All right, let's talk about something you've probably seen all over social media: intestinal cleanses, parasite protocols. They're a huge deal in the wellness world. But what are they, really? Today, we're going to cut right through all that noise and deconstruct what these popular detoxes are all about.
So let's just jump right in. When you hear someone say they're on a parasite cleanse, what does that actually involve? What are they taking? What's the daily routine look like? That's exactly what we're going to break down.
First things first, to really get a handle on any of these protocols, you gotta know what's in the bottle, right? So let's start there with the core ingredients you're gonna see again and again in pretty much every popular cleanse out there.
Okay, so this is kind of the classic herbal toolkit, and a lot of these have been around for a long time. You've got black walnut hull, which has this compound called juglone that's believed to be, well, pretty toxic to parasites. Then there's wormwood, which is where we get artemisinin in, a pretty well-known antiparasitic. Clove is a really big one, and we'll get to why in just a sec. And you'll almost always see other supportive stuff in the mix, like pau d'arco or caprylic acid from coconuts, which are thought to have these broader antimicrobial effects. All right, so I mentioned clove was a big deal. Why? Well, it all comes down to this one compound, eugenol. See, the thinking behind these protocols is that while other herbs might go after the adult parasites, eugenol is the key to destroying their eggs. And that's seen as absolutely critical. It's all about breaking that life cycle so they don't just come right back. Okay, so now we know the what, the ingredients. But what about the how? How are they actually used? Because it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. There are actually a few different schools of thought, different philosophies on how to approach this. Let's check them out. You can pretty much break down the common protocols into four main camps. You've got the old school, really aggressive Hulda Clark method. Then there's the super popular modern powder cleanses you see everywhere. On the other end, you have these much gentler, longer, diet-based approaches. And then there's this new hybrid thing cropping up, mixing herbs with pharmaceuticals. And as you can see right here, they are really different when it comes to how long they last and just how intense they are. So let's drill down a bit and compare the two big ones you'll hear about most often in the herbal world. You've got the original Dr. Hulda Clark protocol. Think of it as the OG aggressive approach. It's super focused, just those three core herbs, but the doses ramp up like crazy. And yeah, it sometimes involves some pretty controversial add-ons. Then you've got the modern powder cleanse. This is what's everywhere now. It's all about convenience, a premixed powder, a whole spectrum of herbs, and a steady, fixed dose. And it's almost always paired with things called binders, like activated charcoal, to supposedly help absorb toxins. All right, so we've got the ingredients and the philosophies down. But what does this actually look like day to day for someone doing one of these? Let's walk through a pretty standard timeline for a modern protocol. So a 30-day plan is usually broken down into distinct phases. It'll kick off with a prep phase for a few days, cut out the sugar, the dairy, the processed stuff. Basically, try to make it a less friendly place for any pathogens. Then you hit the main event, the full dose phase, taking the herbal formula every day. Right around the middle, things often ramp up into a peak kill phase where you might add in something extra potent like oregano oil. And then you have the wind down. The last week or so is about tapering off the herbs and focusing on supporting your body, especially the liver, as it processes everything. And listen, the herbal formula is really just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. A full protocol is loaded with add-ons. You've got those binders we talked about, charcoal, bentonite cray, which people are told to take a few hours away from the herbs so they don't mess with absorption. But you'll also see other things thrown in the mix: food-grade diatomaceous earth, raw pumpkin and papaya seeds, even high doses of vitamins like C and magnesium. And almost always, there are big dietary changes like intermittent fasting or going low carb. Okay, this all leads to the big question, right? What does it actually feel like to do one of these things? I mean, with all these potent herbs and major diet changes, what are people saying they experience? Probably the number one thing you'll hear about is something called a die-off reaction. It's also known as a Herxheimer reaction. And what's really interesting is that in these circles, it's not seen as a bad thing. Actually, it's often seen as proof that the protocol is working. People describe it as feeling like you have the flu for a little while. Fatigue, headaches, maybe a rash or an upset stomach. And the theory is that this is caused by a flood of toxins being released by all the pathogens that are dying off. And here's the thing. For a lot of people, this isn't a one-and-done deal. Not at all. The real dedicated followers will often run a full cleanse cycle several times a year. We're talking 2, 3, maybe even 4 times, often scheduled around the changing of the seasons, kind of like routine maintenance for the body. Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting because we're seeing a new trend pop up. It's this hybrid protocol where the line between all natural and pharmaceutical gets, well, pretty blurry. It's becoming more and more common to see people, sometimes with a doctor's guidance, sometimes not, adding actual prescription antiparasitic drugs like ivermectin right into their herbal cleanse. It's definitely a controversial move, for sure, but it really shows you how these protocols are always changing and evolving.
So, that really brings us to the big final question, doesn't it? I mean, these protocols have come such a long way, from what were basically simple folk remedies to these super complex multi-stage systems, and now they're even bringing in prescription drugs. As our scientific understanding of the gut microbiome just explodes and the wellness industry keeps growing like crazy, it really makes you wonder, what's next? What in the world is the detox of tomorrow going to look like?